Namaskar. Welcome to this session. Welcome students of MA Philosophy. A very good morning to this session on your block heterodox system, Buddhism Unit 1. I apologize for what happened at 11 o'clock this morning. There is a password and login problem. Many of you could not log in, so I also could not log in. So we will take up that technical issue later in the day today. But I thought I will not waste time so that you can have the talk on Buddhism Unit 1. What is heterodox? Heterodox is opposed to orthodox. That is, it is not a classical system which has been inherited and practiced, but it is a mixture of traditions, what in Hindi you call Mila-Jula. The unit before this, you have Buddhism, which is a very general unit. One need not sit and do the salient and highlight the important features. You please go through that simple unit on Buddhism, which is a historical narrative about the historical figure of Buddha, his lifetime, his context, his socio-economic context. Buddhism was more like a socio-religious reform movement from within the Hindu or the Vedic socio-religious system. Now, what are the main topics that we are going to cover in this Buddhism Unit 1? Metaphysical views of Buddhism, doctrine of dependent origination, practical teachings of Buddhism, Nirvana and Karma. So in this particular unit, Buddhism 1, we are going to cover the major concepts and ideas that Buddha dealt with, asked questions and tried to give solutions and answers. Then we will complete with a very brief summary of the concept of karma. Early Buddhism is also known as Pali Buddhism or canonical Buddhism. What you understand by Pali and canonical is that the ancient Buddhist literature was written in Pali language. We have Prakrit also, very commonly used in ancient India, and most of the Jaina literature was written in Prakrit, but Buddhist literature opted for Pali. And canon means Shastric, as you say in Sanskrit or Hindi, Shastra, that is the religious literature available. Early Buddhism must be differentiated from later schools which grew up long after Buddha had taught. And this was founded by what Prince Siddhartha after he became Buddha, the enlightened. So metaphysical views of Buddhism, I repeat, doctrine of dependent origination, practical teachings of Buddhism, Nirvana and Karma. I am repeating so that we remember that these are the 5 important subtopics we are going to cover in this particular session. Introduction. A very brief and general introduction. Buddha was born in 6th century BC in the Republic of Licchavi, which is in Tarai region of Nepal, bordering northern Bihar and southern Nepal. It was an age of spiritual restlessness. As I said, Buddhism and Jainism in particular were socio-religious reform movements of their age. Society was going away from philosophy, the whole sacrificial cult of the Vedic religion. Vedic religion became very, very complicated. It was all karma kanda in the Hindu Shastras. Lot of complications, rituals, do this, don't do that. So lot many enlightened people and thinkers questioned and protested against those complicated sacrificial based religion, the yajna. The Vedic sacrifices meant conformity to the letters of law, that is, you should do this and you should not do that, instead of spirit of worship. Instead of reaching the God, instead of reaching the Almighty, instead of reaching the ultimate reality, it was all about karma kanda, that is, what you should do in terms of ritual and what you should not do in your daily life. Buddha made this great renunciation. He left the kingdom, he left his household, his family, the luxury of a prince's life at the age of 29, and first tried to find spiritual quest by philosophic thought under the tutelage of great teachers of his time. But soon he found that all those discussions were no cure for the mental unrest, for the unpeaceful uh, feelings of his time. The other means of escape was through bodily austerities. He wandered with 5 ascetics who underwent bodily mortifications of the most severe type. However, even that kind of severe austerism or asceticism did not give him any peace or solace, and hence he decided to have a fresh course of self-discipline characterized by less vigor. That is, you need not do so much of japa and tapa. That is chanting and tapasya, like meditation, so rigorously or vigorously in order to realize the ultimate reality of this life and death. He won over all evil thoughts and dispositions, conquered desire. The term is Trishna in Sanskrit. Attachment, raga, aversion, arati. He gained a deep insight into mysteries of existence, first of self, then of human destiny in general, and lastly of the universe as a whole. So he himself was concerned just not with the immediate goals for A or B person or people of the Lichavi or Northeast or Northern India, but for the entire humanity and the universe as such. Thus seated under the Bodhi tree on the banks of Niranjana river at Bodh Gaya, a new light dawned on Prince Siddhartha, and he became the enlightened one or Buddha. The details you can always read. Buddha never wrote any books, or hence there is a certain amount of vagueness about his teachings as they were gathered from works that were compiled a long time after his death. His teachings were compiled by his successors, the monks, only after a long time. However, the total literature of Buddhism is so large that it is quite impossible to master all of them. And I would like to say from 1st and 2nd century AD, later on, the Buddhist scholars also started writing in Sanskrit as Sanskrit became a vehicle of intellectual communication in India and no longer in Pali. But we are talking about the Pali literature time. The Buddhist canonical literature is generally known as Tripitaka, the 3 baskets, after the 3 sections into which they are divided. Sutta or utterances of Buddha himself. So you can say first is Sutta Pitaka, that is the term is Pali, Sutra in Sanskrit or Hindi. So suttas or the teachings of Buddha himself. Vinaya Pitaka, or the rules of conduct for the monks. Abhidhamma Pitaka, or philosophical discussion that Buddha had. So these three are known as the three jewels of Buddhism. These Pitakas are often in the form of dialogues, and there is no methodical discussion in them of any topic in the today's modern sense of term. They contain many metaphors and allegories, which is also the cause of some indefiniteness about the doctrine of Buddha. So he won't talk in direct, he won't talk in very direct or in very easy terms, but his philosophy involves sometimes comparisons, riddles, like that. Of the three Pitakas, the Sutta Pitaka, that is the first Pitaka, or his teachings and sayings, are very important as they contain discourses by Buddha. It is again divided into 5 sections. Digha Nikaya, or long discourse. Majjhima Nikaya, discourse of shorter length. Sanyutta Nikaya, collection of short pronouncements. Anguttara Nikaya, short passage arranged in sections. Khuddaka Nikaya, a matter of works varying types containing Dhammapada, Jataka tales, etc. Do you know the Jataka tales all about? Mahatma Buddha, before he became Buddha in the birth as Prince Siddha, he is supposed to have had 500 births before. Jataka means born. So, from animal incarnation to normal human being and finally to Buddha. So, all those 500 birth stories of Buddha are there in the Jataka tales. They are very popular. You have translation of Jataka tales not only into English but in many Indian languages and meant for children when you grow up in the school. Vinaya Pitaka contains the rules of conduct for the Buddhist order of monks and nuns. The Abhidhamma Pitaka is a collection of 7 works on Buddhist philosophy and metaphysics. I'll come to metaphysics when we come to that subsection. What does it mean? There are numerous other works in Pali which are not generally considered religious or canonical. The most important are the commentaries on the books of the canon. It is believed that most of these were compiled in Sri Lanka or Ceylon by the great Dr. Buddhaghosha from earlier commentaries. At a later date, Jataka verses were made into prose. So initially they were in the form of poetry, the Jataka tales. Later on they were made into prose, and that is one of the most beautiful narrative literature. It's very nice and easy reading. Anybody would, once you read it, will be interested to read the next one. Buddhaghosha is also the author of Vishuddhi Magga. Magga means marg, the path, which means the way of purification. Another very important Pali work of early date is Milinda Panha, Questions of King Milinda. Milinda is the Pali term for the Greek name Menander. He was an Indo-Greek king. Those of you who have had history in your earlier days in school or your undergraduate times, and very famous, the monk, a question answer session between the Indo-Greek king Menander or Milinda and the Buddhist monk. The inscriptions of Emperor Ashoka, the Mauryan Emperor Ashoka, 273 to 232 BC, are also of great value because they are inspired by Buddhism, inculcating the moral philosophy of Buddhism. Though Buddhism is a non-Vedic school, therefore it is heterodox. It is opposed to orthodox Vedic thought. And essentially different from Upanishad, in one sense, we can say that certain Upanishadic tendencies are carried to their logical conclusions by the Buddha. For example, the Upanishads are against the belief in a personal God, and Buddha dismisses the concept of a separate God altogether. Do you get it? That he was a product of the Upanishadic times and Upanishadic thinking, and Upanishad, many of us, many of the Hindus know that it is a repository of questions. Who am I? Why I am here? Why have I come into this birth? And after death, where do we go? These are the basic questions of Upanishads. So also the self is explained negatively in the Upanishads, and the Buddha eliminates the concept of a self altogether. Buddha's belief in karma doctrine is a clear proof of the connection of Buddhism with Upanishads. If Sarnath Sarman, as we know that very popularly known as the churning of the wheel of dharma, the Sarnath Sarman, where is Sarnath? Close next to Banaras or Varanasi, where he gave the first sermon, is to be taken as our guide. We may take our point of the Buddha's instructions as basic, namely, just as there are ills or illnesses, there and their causes of illnesses, so also is a cure. Now, what are the Pali terms for ills? Heya. And what are the causes of illnesses? Heya, hetu. Hetu always means, even till now in many Indian languages, which are derived from the Sanskrit, we say hetu. Hetu means what is the reason or karan. And also a cure, hana, a path, hana paya exists. This is just like the science of medicine. If there is a ailment, roga, there will be a cause for it, roga hetu. The emphasis was on the performance of sacrifices. People were becoming more dogmatic and less positivistic. Buddha revolted against their trend and rejected all that was not positively known. Hence, he was against the Vedic rituals and Vedic tradition. He did not believe in any supernatural power. Already, he negated the self. He negated the separate concept of Godhead as such, and that is why later on, when Buddhism branched up into 2 or 3 main Buddhist subsects, Mahayana Buddhism, Hinayana Buddhism, Vajrayana Buddhism, they all changed later on. Mahayana became very popular and patronized by the ancient Indian emperor called Kanishka of the Kushan Empire, as you are familiar with basic history of India. Hinayana particularly continued with Buddha's traditions, and there is no worship of Buddha in that. There is no worship of image of Buddha in that. To put it briefly, Buddha did not believe in anything beyond the sphere of perception and reason. So, for him, what was basic? Whatever you can perceive with your senses, physical senses, whatever you can see, speak, or hear, is the reality. We need not think or philosophize beyond that. One of the most important features of Buddhism, therefore, is pragmatism. What is pragmatism? Practical. Whatever is here, here. Nothing much beyond that. Now let us come to next important subsection of this unit, metaphysical views of Buddhism. What is metaphysics? Knowledge about nature, reality of nature, and it deals with differences between mind and matter, between attributes and substance. That if it is a substance, what are the attributes? Between actuality, reality, and potentiality of something. Early Buddhism recognizes the distinction between consciousness and matter, that is, mind and matter, as I said, but does not accept either a permanent self or a permanent, unchanging material or a physical world. Buddha established that there is nothing permanent and declared that everything is anatya or not self. Buddhist writings declare thus, at any moment of experience, we stumble upon some particular perception or other of heat or cold, light or shade, love or hatred, pain or pleasure. As given in experience, the Buddha believed in these transient sensations and said that it is not necessary to believe that these sensations belong to a permanent self. That is, he believed in only the states of consciousness. To him, the sensations and the thought together with the physical frame with which they are associated are themselves the self. He described the self as an aggregate, as a collection. You know, I and you are supposed to be a collection of matter, a few things. It is a psychophysical entity known as Nama Rupa. We have a mind, we have a psychic ability of our own, but then at the same time, we have a physical, full body, face, features, etc. So entity known as Nama Rupa, name and form. Nama or name refers to the physical factors and Rupa or form refers to the physical frame, your body. A close analysis of the self shows that it is made up of 5 factors or skandhas. And what are these 5 factors that Nama Rupa consists of? Sensation or feeling of pleasure, pain and indifference. Next, perception or idea of conceptual knowledge. That is, perception or idea. Every one of us has a perception or idea of everything. That is conceptual knowledge. Then, cognitive disposition or sanskaras. What are sanskaras? That is the cultural traits, your culture that you have inherited, and not only from your parents, but from your surroundings, from observing your friends, your gurus, your tutors, the literature that you study. So sanskaras, you keep building it inside yourself. Finally, discriminative intelligence or reason, physical form. So it is from the brain, from the physical form, that we know how to judge. How to judge discriminative intelligence or reasoning ability that you and I have. This brings out clearly the analytical character of Buddhism, highlighting the psychological basis of its analysis. Do you get it? That is, it is not like the Vedic religion of Buddha's time, that is of the Rig Vedic and later Vedic time. And at the end of later Vedic time, we come to Buddha's time. And Vedic time was all about whatever has been written in the, or in the oral traditions, whatever does the literature or law of religion say, whatever the gurus or the monks have said, you got to follow. But here there is a lot of reasoning, lot of analysis, and lot of psychological basis of its analysis. The other important view of Buddhism is Kshanika Bada or law of momentariness. Kshanika or momentary, it is here in one form and it's not there in the next moment. According to which both the mental and physical reality are subjected to constant flux. As I said, it is here just now, it is not there next moment. So it is in constant flux. What is in constant flux? Mental and physical reality. When we look around us, we notice that everything is subjected to constant change and nothing is permanent, nothing is fixed, static or standing. To some extent, it is language, which leads to mistaken notion of something enduring. We will say it is there. We are just saying, and it gives us impression it is there permanently. We don't see before or after that where it has come from or where it is going. To some extent, it is the language which gives us this mistaken notion. We use one word to refer to one thing and one name to refer to one particular person, and that makes us believe that a thing or a person is enduring even though it is constantly changing. So as such, there is nothing static, fixed, permanent, or enduring that I and you get the impression, but everything and everybody is in a constant flux, is in a constant change. There is impermanence. There is nothing so permanent that Buddha believed in. For example, the making of a chariot. So, what is a chariot? When the king asked, is it the whole cart that you are sitting in or looking at a chariot, or it is the assemblage, just a symbol for the various parts assembled together in a particular way, the wheels and the axle, they together make chariot. Doctrine of dependent origination. Now let's come to one of the Samutpaddya, one of the most important uh, philosophical doctrine, you can say, from Buddhism is dependent origination. That is, one leads to another. One is a cause leads to an effect. From that effect, another that becomes cause for another effect. So it's like a chain reaction. According to this doctrine, this arising, that arises, this ceasing, that ceases to be. The doctrine of universal change and impermanence follows from the fundamental teaching of Buddhism, namely Pratitya Samutpada. Samutpada, it is born out of. Change can be understood in terms of conditional existence. This law of causation is the basis of continuity. Both the elements of material world and of mental world are subjected to laws of physical and moral causation. This law insists on the necessity of sufficient conditions. Buddha neither believed in being or non-being, but only in becoming. That's what we were talking about in the previous section, that it is there, it is not there, the Shkhanika path, right? Okay. So, uh, he believed in becoming. Everything or everybody, you and I, are always becoming. We are not static or fixed entity. When we view the aggregate, whole collection, be it the self, you or I, or the material object in time or a computer. For instance, giving example, we notice that there are not the same even for two moments. So the self and the material world each is in a flux, in changing condition, continuity. Just as the flame, but continuity doesn't mean that it is fixed. It continues, but it changes its nature. Just as the flame and the stream of water, everything is only a series of succession of similar things or happenings. The notion of fixity is fallacious. Notion of fixity is false. We know through experience that everything is characterized by birth, growth, decay, and death, which means that everything is subject to constant change and that nothing is permanent. Birth, growth, decay, old age, and death. So I and you are also changing. That everything is subjected to constant change and that nothing is permanent. What is important to note is that for Buddha, there is incessant change, but at the same time, there is nothing that changes. There is action, but no agent. Since everything is a series, it is relevant to ask as to what is the relation between any two successive members of the series. One explanation given during the time of Buddha was that it is accidental, whatever happens. And the other explanation recognized a causal relation as underlying the succession, but introduced a supernatural power like God in addition to the known factors. Now also we do talk about, it was destined. Then when we are talking about destiny, we do keep a supernatural power, uh, God and Almighty, ultimate reality behind that. That this is happening because it was destined and the destiny has been fixed by somebody else. Buddha rejected these kind of thinking or perception. Buddha rejected both these views and opined a necessity as the sole governing factor. According to him, necessity was the main factor, not accidental or something which was distinct. In denying chance, he took his stand on the uniformity of nature. There is no chance. It is nature. It has to happen. And in denying the supernatural or a Godhead intervention, he disassociated himself from all dogmatic religion of his time, all the Godhead based religion. So, according to Buddhism, the causal law governing all change in the phenomenal world is not a mere unfolding of a cause, but the result of certain external factors cooperating with it. Change can therefore be understood in terms of conditional existence. I repeat, change can be understood in terms of conditional existence. Itself is universal and does not admit of exceptions, but yet the operation of the law is dependent on condition, cause and effect. Cause and effect. This is the precise reason why it is called dependent origination, samutpada, or pratyakta samutpada. That being present, this becomes. From the arising of that, this arises. The literal meaning of pratitya samutpada is arising in correlation with. Conversely, this law also means that when the conditions are not there, the series will also finish. From the cessation, that is from the end of that, the effect also finishes. The Buddhist psychology, which explains their views on epistemology, is based on the theory of causation. Causation theory is very central to Buddhism, or law of dependent origination. As pointed out earlier, Nama Rupa, that is aggregate of name and form, and refer to 5 conditions, and they rise depending upon one another. In Samyukta Nikaya, one of the Pali texts, it is said that the 4 Mahabhutas, elements of fire, air, water, and earth, were the hetu or the reason for the communication of the form, Rupakhanda or the form. So we are built of earth, water, air, and fire. Contact is the cause of communication. Remember, Akash is not there. We say na Panchabhuta, but Akash is not there in the philosophy of Buddhism. But fire, air, water, and earth are there, and which we are constituted of. Contact is the cause of communication of the feelings. Sense contact is also the reason for communication. Sense contact is also the hetu or the reason for communication of mental states and activity. But the Nama Rupa is the hetu. So Nama Rupa means the physical form and your mind. You are the reason for the communication. So Pratyuta Samutpada, or the theory of dependent origination, is the most significant in early Buddhism. It is central to all the views of Buddhism. Unlike the other causal theories which lead to determinism, Buddha's views make room for human effort. So his was more a human-centric teaching, human-centric philosophy. Now let us come to a bit of discussion. One of the commonly alluded criticisms against Khanikabada or the momentariness or the doctrine of momentariness is as to how such a theory can account for memory. We do retain memory, don't we? Now, if everything is continuously renewed, and it is important to know how recognition of objects, the apprehension of objects as the same that we already know is explained. Buddhism answers that things in the two moments of cognition are only similar and we mistake them to be the same. So they are different but they look to be similar. In other words, all recognition is false. Erroneous means it is wrong. Since similarity is mistaken for identity. Similarity is mistaken for identity. So that means two things are different. As regards memory, the Buddhist explanation is that each phase of experience as it appears and disappears is brought into the next, so that every successive phase has within it all the potentialities of its predecessors, which manifest when the conditions are favorable. Hence, though a man is not the same in two successive moments, he is not quite different. Let's come to the next important point, the world of phenomenal manifestation, the state of thusness. So it has become thus. The causal theory of Buddhism usually applies to the phenomenal world, that is what is happening around you. But in speaking of the ideal world, as realized, the latter sense is also applied. So phenomenal world and ideal world. Taking the first sense of the term dharma dhatu, it refers to the actual world in which you live, the realm of all elements of phenomenal existence, the world, the earth. Causal origination is thus the theory which sets out the fact that all beings are correlative, interdependent, and mutually originating. Matter and mind arise simultaneously due to their interdependence. It refers to the totality of all existence. Dharma Dhatu, in its reference to the world, speaks of the sphere of samsara, life flux, the cycle of birth and death, which is a dynamic becoming. Now let's come to practical teachings of Buddhism. Practical teachings, as we said right in the beginning, that Buddhist religion and philosophy are very pragmatic. It has to do with our real living on this earth and the day-to-day existence with the problems of life. So practical teachings of Buddhism are in conformity with their theoretical philosophy. If all the things in the world are impermanent, then our effort to secure them either for ourselves or for others is meaningless. The very desire for them is delusion or illusion, whatever term you would like to use. We must get over this desire. More than desiring things, we are overcome with the desire to preserve ourselves. Since there is no self, we should get over this craving of the desire to preserve ourselves. With the negation of self, all the narrow selfish impulses necessarily disappear, along with the whole range of narrow love and hatred. Since the belief in self-identity is false, ignorance or avidya becomes the true source of all evil. Thus, here in Buddhism, as in Upanishads, evil is traced to ignorance and the way to escape from samsara through right knowledge. So now we'll come to his true knowledge or vidya in Buddhism is the Four Noble Truth and Arya Satta. We all, you and I, all read about it in our school history textbooks. Now, the Four Arya Satya or the Four Noble Truths. Let's see, what are they? Dukkha or dukh in Hindi, suffering. Samudaya, the origin of suffering, cause of sufferings. Pratitya Samutapad. Nirodha, to finish it, removal of suffering. Marga, the way to remove suffering, the path to remove suffering. According to Buddha, the failure to see the Four Noble Truths is what leads to suffering and rebirth. Buddha looks upon suffering as a great disease, and while seeking a remedy, he follows the scientific method of a physician. After arriving at the right cause of misery, he proposes the remedy. Without a proper diagnosis, no disease can be cured. Similarly, Buddha gives the remedy for analyzing the causes of suffering. That is the reason why the Buddha is called the great healer. The first three noble truths speak of theoretical aspect of the Buddhist teaching, and the last its practical aspect. The first noble truth is about the fact that there is a suffering. The Buddhist texts say that birth is painful, decay is painful, disease is painful, death is painful, union with unpleasant is also painful, and painful is the separation from the pleasant. Any craving that is not satisfied is also painful. In short, five aggregates: body, feeling, perception, will or your wish, and reason, which spring from attachment are painful, right? So everything in our life is, and everything that is sorrow, that is sad or tragic, is from our attachment and desire, and therefore we have to remove it according to the desire, and the cause of that suffering have to be removed according to Buddha. The second noble truth is about origin of suffering. There is the cause of suffering follows from the belief that whatever is must have had a cause. Pratitya Samutpada clearly states that from arising of that this arises. Now suffering is a fact and it must have had a cause. Buddha found this cause to be ignorance, and the aim of Buddha was to find out the process by which ignorance leads to evil. The way in which ignorance causes misery is explained with the help of the following 12 links. The way in which ignorance causes misery is explained with the help of 12 links. They are ignorance, that is avidya. Next, action or sanskara, consciousness, vijnana, name and form, namrupa. Six feels, the five senses that we have and the mind together with their objects. Then contact between the senses and objects, sparsh, sensation, desire, Krishna, clinging to existence, being, rebirth or jati, pain, old age and death, jara and marana. This chain of causation is not restricted only to the present life, but it includes reference to the past and future. The third noble truth is the removal of suffering. Removal of suffering, breaking the chain of existence, bhava nirodha. Buddha states that for each condition in the chain, there is a cause, a source or origination. If the condition ceases, the effect does not occur. Now let's come to the last Arya Satya. The fourth noble truth is the way to remove suffering. This gives the path that one has to follow in order to overcome suffering. The path of self-discipline, which leads man to the desired goal of emancipation from samskara, is eightfold. Ashtangika Marga, as you have read in your school text history book. They are, we must live by these 8 principles according to Buddha. Right faith, right resolve, right speech, right action, right living, right effort, right thought, and right concentration. To put it briefly, pragya or right knowledge of the fourfold truth is the basis of the entire discipline. Right living prescribed for the layman is different from what is described or prescribed for the monks. But in both cases, the discipline is not very severe. That is why Buddha is famous for his middle path, madhyama, middle path. He is neither too strict nor too lax. Buddha strikes a mean a balance between self-indulgence and self-mortification. Buddha says that self-indulgence is a life of pleasure and devoted to desire and enjoyment, which is very ignoble, unspiritual, unworthy, unreal, and it is all about ignorance. Now let's come to one of the most well-known concepts in Buddhism or Buddhist philosophy, the goal of the nirvana. What do you understand by nirvana? That is liberation from the bondage of life. And once it is bondage of life and death, that we understand generally as a layperson by the term nirvana. Now, what is the nirvana in Buddhism? The goal of discipline is nirvana. I mean, why should we be practicing the 8 rightful path and 4 noble truth? Because we want to reach nirvana. The person who has attained the ultimate goal is called Arhat. And what is this ultimate goal? Nirvana. What is moksha to a Hindu? The Tao is to a Chinese mystic, Fana to a Sufi saint, eternal life to the followers of Jesus. It is Nirvana to a Buddhist. The word Nirvana literally means blowing out or becoming cool. It is the blowing out of fire of lust, that is desire, or resentment or glamour. It is thus becoming cool, reaching perfect calm, to be reached within the 4 corners of the present life. An Arhat, after the dissolution of his body and mind, reaches the state of parinirvana, something in our Hindu tradition we have been calling Mahasamadhi. Thus, blowing out and cooling is not complete annihilation. It is not cessation, but extinction or dying out of hot passion. That is passion for everything that life has to give, everything good. So we must detach ourselves in order to reach the ultimate goal of nirvana. If this is the destruction of the fires of lust, hatred, and ignorance. These 2 implications of nirvana, namely blowing out and cooling, are to be understood as negative, the positive sides of one ultimate state of being, which cannot be adequately described in terms of thought, but it is given in one's own experience. Buddha asked his followers to be light to themselves. Be enlightened, be light to yourself. Just not depend on a guru or a teacher. Finally, we come to the concept of karma. You and I, what do we understand by karma? Karma is an important concept in Buddhist philosophy. The knowledge of Buddhism will not be complete finally without a discussion of Buddha's views on karma. Karma is one of the most important doctrines of Buddhism. Buddhism resolves the human being into a number of elements called dhammas, which possess no permanent existence. We've been talking about it. Thus, to Buddhist belief in transmigration seems inconsistent with their denial of an enduring self. Philosopher Dusan criticizes Buddhism by saying that karma needs an individual bearer like the Upanishadic self and the Buddhists. Therefore, Buddhists are therefore contradicting themselves by believing in karma and denying an enduring self. I said in the beginning, you have it in your unit. It is written. You can read for yourself that Buddha himself did not believe in the self, but Buddhists do believe in the concept of karma. So, however, the belief in karma doctrine really presents no difficulty to Buddhism. Let us see how does Buddhism explain the concept of karma. If there can be action without an agent, there can be transmigration without a transmigrating self. The word karma means deeds or in singular action. So there is really nothing wrong in saying that a deed is not immortal. There is nothing wrong in saying that the deed is not immortal. And what transmigrates is not any soul, but only one's character. But the question still remains, how can character can be there when there is no entity in itself to be reborn? Do you get it? How can there be a character when the entity itself is not there to be reborn? When a person dies, his character lives. According to Buddhism, character lives after him and by its force brings into existence a being. Very, very interesting. So because of the character or characteristics that after a man dies, those characteristics bring a new human being in, and we consider it as the next birth. Who, though possessing a different form, Namarup or a physical form, is entirely influenced by the character that he had or the characteristic in his or her last birth. Though the dead person does not revive, another may be born with the same disposition. Let's repeat. Though the dead person does not revive, another may be born with the same disposition, that is with the same characteristic and personality. Very, very interesting. When a lamp is burning, there is transmission of light and heat. They are transmitted every moment, and when lamp is lit from another, before the former is extinguished, a new series of flame is started. That's how a new birth is explained through these lamps and this series of lamps. Before the one lamp is extinguished, you can lit the next lamp, and it will also glow with the same characteristic of the one lamp is just extinguished, right? So that's how the birth of a new human being is being discussed. You know, who attains character or characteristics of the previous personality. Buddhism makes a distinction between fruitful and useless karma. When a man's deeds are performed from the three conditions of covetousness, that is, we desire, hatred, and infatuation, he reaps the fruition of those deeds, be it in the present life or in some subsequent one. Buddha makes it clear that the law of karma operates in such a way that the character of individual and his disposition is of great importance in giving reward and punishments, even when the deed performed by two persons is the same. In Anuttara Nikaya, it is explained that one person who has done a slight deed of wickedness may have the result in his own present life. That man who is not proficient in the management of his body, in his perception, concentration, and wisdom, who is bound by wickedness, would go to hell, whereas another man may not go to hell for the same mistake because he is proficient in the management of his body, perception, concentration, wisdom, and is greatly involved in good deeds. So, this paragraph, it means uh, a lot of managerial skills in controlling your physical life, physical activity, which has to do with the end result. So Buddha believed thus. So we have finished with all the important concepts in Buddhist philosophy under unit Buddhism 1. Let us sum up. So particularly with reference to karma doctrine, what we see from the description, that for Buddha the self is a continuity, and hence there is no inconsistency in upholding the karma doctrine. It admits that nothing that we do disappear without leaving its imprint or result behind, and the good or evil, so resulting recoils upon the doer. Buddha rationalized the whole doctrine. And he disassociated it from all supernatural, that is very spiritual, otherworldly, and materialistic characteristic. Thus, the law of karma in Buddhism is a law in the sphere of morality, working according to its nature, and by itself the law of karma works. Thank you very much, students of MA Philosophy. We are sorry for the password problem. So this is a video lecture which I am going to upload in YouTube. In YouTube, and I will send a mail to all of you so that you can open the YouTube and listen to this lecture. Have a good day and all the best. Please do the exercises in this particular Buddhism one. All the answers are also given. Do your exercises. Good luck to all.